Since we have a quorum. Welcome to the Zoning Advisory Committee meeting of February 3rd. I like that the date is up there, so I no one was going to remind me. So we do have a quorum, so we will begin, but we are expecting a few other members to join us shortly. So tonight, we are now past the crunch time of getting ready for town meeting. But there's, obviously more to do. And I thought that a preliminary discussion, just to start to air some of the issues on both sides of short-term rentals, also known as Airbnb, might be great. Also, there were references, internet links provided to us by, I think it was Mark Hyman and some other people. And so I was able to look at some of those websites and just get a little sense of what's going on in the state at this point for those, so we can go through that. The fire sprinklers in residential developments, we've certainly discussed before, but again, just to delve into it a little bit more, look at the subdivision regulations, and potentially that can be added if planning board thinks that's a good idea, but we could make a recommendation where to add it and what type of wording we need to go into. It looks like there's quite a lot of details about, water pressure and supply and so on, so we may have to do some more research to to determine that. And then go through the work plan and just prioritize for the next several months what we want to do. I'm sorry I didn't send that out ahead of time, so we'll be able to go through that, and I will send out an update with our discussion tonight. Okay, so regarding Airbnb short-term rentals, I am going to just read a few excerpts from the internet sites that people gave us. In 2018, Massachusetts State Legislature did pass an act allowing short-term rentals and regulating them. There is a tax on them, and they're defining short-term rentals as anything less than 30 days at a time. That's a short-term rental. So, and they do require that people register if they're doing that work, but it's primarily for the purpose of collecting taxes. So it's on Mass Tax Connect, which some of you might be familiar with. And the other interesting point, which I thought could play into our discussions on this, is that if someone is renting their house for less than 14 days over the year, then they don't have to collect tax. They have to still register and let the state know, of course, but they don't have to collect tax. But the minute it passes 14 days, then they're liable for all of the tax, including those first 14 days. So, okay. The Massachusetts state law does allow for any towns to prohibit or to regulate in any way short-term rentals. So just because the state is allowing it and collecting taxes and so on, they still let any towns prohibit it if they want to. There's also, of course, a mechanism for towns to tax short-term rentals as well. So, and the other thing that I thought was interesting, and this is just for the short review, I'm sure we need to read into it more, but is that a lot of the towns are doing registration of all properties being used for short-term rentals, if they're allowing short-term rentals. So, the state statute does have requirements about insurance and things like that as well. So, okay. So, I just wanted to, hear from everybody, your thoughts, your preliminary thoughts, what research you've done, if any, and, what anecdotal information you have perhaps to share So, anyone begin, what your thoughts are?
So, one thing I saw is, it's not just Airbnb, there is new ones coming up now, VRB and all that stuff, so hopefully we should make the language generic, so it applies to any future apps or anything that comes. And I was wondering, maybe it should have its own section, instead of having to, trying to fit it into a residential zone section, subdivision, sub-bylaw or something. Instead, it has its own section, so it's clear, people know what to look for. So maybe that was another thing I was thinking about, but other than that, it's very, how do you regulate? I wanted to know, how do we collect data that this many, it's being rented out? There's no way, how does an enforcement officer enforce this? Because it's not visible. Somebody can come, somebody can rent. How do we keep a track of this? That seems to be like I don't understand yet how we will be able to do that. Okay.
I think the primary thing is neighbors seeing a lot of unusual traffic or cars parking or coming and going and raising the issue. I don't think we're going to establish an Airbnb police force to go door to door and checking residences, but I think just being vigilant and saying, letting people know in town that we do have regulations, and there should be some kind of a public display that these addresses are registered and they are Airbnb and we are collecting taxes on them. As a relatively frequent user of Airbnbs, I like a lot of what that has to offer, and I think as a town, the third Monday of April every year, there's a lot of demand for temporary housing. So I would hate to see us take a stance that we're going to try to eliminate Airbnbs from the town of Hopkinton. I would much more be in favor of regulating it and taxing it and making it part of the economic fiber of the community.
I agree with what you're saying. I personally am having a little bit of difficulty understanding how Airbnbs could be a booming business in Hopkinton, but
I'm with you. Like, why would you want to come here as a vacation destination necessarily? But but clearly,
I don't see it as I see it more as temporary housing for business travelers who are doing business along the 495 corridor, and they don't want to stay in a Marriott or a Hilton. They like the local flavor of being in a community. So, you're in town, Monday night through Thursday night, and prefer that. So, I'm not saying until the International Marathon Center gets built, this is not going to be a destination for tourists.
So I've used Airbnb just a couple of times, but it's been in a situation where we're visiting family. It's just a little bit too far to do it in a day trip, and really wanting to spend a little bit more time with them. But they're in an area that only has one or two pretty expensive inns and no cheap and easy hotels, but we found an Airbnb nearby, and basically all we used it for was sleeping, and then we went over to their house for the rest of the time we were there, so but it was very convenient for that purpose. So it was just my family, the four of us, so yeah.
Would we know if something like that is already happening? I haven't gone on Airbnb and actually searched for Hopkinton, so maybe
it could be happening, absolutely. But obviously, I think people in town want to do it, legally and above board and so on. And so, so by helping define it more clearly, I think that'll help people. Thoughts? What are your initial thoughts, Ted?
I don't have strong thoughts, frankly. I think that, great, you have a weekend. That doesn't get taxed, though. It sounds like they have to have 14 days of business before the taxes kick in, right?
14 days over a year.
Over a year.
So
if our only real business is marathon weekend,
then that would,
that wouldn't be taxed.
no.
No, but
I mean,
for the
if
business
somebody-
traveler,
Yeah.
it certainly could be.
Yeah. So if somebody is just renting their house for marathon weekend and that's it,
Right,
That would,
then it wouldn't be taxable,
right,
Yeah.
that's what I thought.
at least under the state law. So,
And I was just looking to see if we have, I think, what I think is, it's mostly a non-issue. I think we've got a handful of Airbnb properties. I don't think this came up because somebody was complaining a couple of years ago. I seem to remember 3 years ago, maybe there was one property where one neighbor was concerned about traffic coming in and out, or something like that. And I think our attitude on Zach then was, well, go talk to your neighbor. Like, that really ought to be the end of the discussion. So I don't have strong feelings. I was about to see what the Airbnb offerings are on Marathon Weekend, just out of curiosity. But I don't have strong feelings on this one, for or against. Unless something happens, I don't think we're going to be the business travel could happen. I'm a teacher, not a businessman, I don't know. But I don't think it's going to explode to be something that's really a major pressing issue one way or the other, is my thought, so.
So when I've thought about this, I've thought, well, I can understand, neighbors not necessarily wanting a house being used solely for short-term rentals. So I could see that, if the house is pretty close to their house, if it attracts a lot of parties or something like that. I'm thinking maybe a lake house or something like that would be a possibility for let's rent this Airbnb and we're going to have 20 people come over and have a big party for a weekend or whatever, just.
I think that the lake is another area that could be, if you're going to be gone for a month in the summer, and
why not? Yeah.
You could collect some money anyway. I mean, that's
Yeah, exactly.
It could be.
But then I look at it from the standpoint of a property owner and saying, yeah, it would be nice to be able to make a little extra money. Again, he comes up with the accessory dwelling unit too. It's like, I have this empty dwelling unit that's really separate from my own house, but I'm going to be living in my house and I'm, making a little extra money. In fact, my sister, who doesn't live in this state, she does that. They have a house that when they bought it, it was set up. It had actually 2 separate apartments. Worked really well for when they had teenagers and then going into their 20s, and then they kind of had their own separate apartment. But then they've also rented it from time to time. And it's worked really well for them, just a little extra cash, So, and, it hasn't been a big issue, but those aren't short-term rentals. They're long-term rentals, they're 6 months or a year.
I'd like to follow up
more.
on Ted's
Yeah.
point about saying, is this are we creating an issue that really isn't an issue, or should we consider having a public hearing about Airbnbs to
See if it
we might
is,
have
yeah.
25 people show up, or we may have nobody show up.
And I don't think it's an issue per se. I think it's really much more of a, well, should we talk about this before it is an issue, And, yeah, and I agree, public forum, let's just bring it up. And, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the reason one of the points when we wanted to discuss about short-term rentals is because somebody brought up a concern that what if this is misused? Like what if something
Yeah.
goes wrong? But anything that can go wrong with a short-term rental can go wrong with a rental house property as well. So we don't regulate regular rental. So short-term rental by its special. I've been trying to think of what could be the worst case in this. Okay, if we don't have something, how can this be misused? I haven't come up with anything strong that cannot happen with a rental home. Like a traffic increase, if you rent your home regularly, you will get traffic increase. Like security issues, same thing. If you rent out without checking, but at least in these kind of short-term rentals, the apps have control about security. They don't rent it out to people without
Background
there
checks.
is a little bit of background. Something goes on. It's not like there's no zero. It's the Airbnb doesn't let you. There's ratings and stuff, right? If you get a bad rating, you don't usually go get a rental back and stuff. So there's inbuilt a little bit of security in there already, but I don't know. I can't think of a negative yet, that why do we need it right now kind of a thing, but maybe we need to think about it.
I think one way that we could regulate it some way is to use parking as a metric of saying, you have to provide off-street parking of X number of spaces per whatever. And I'm not proposing any language, but if you keep the parking off-street, it could be a limiting factor of who would be available to do that. And that would, the neighbors, if you've got cars all lined up and down your street and it makes it hard to navigate, that's a nuisance. If all the parking, again, that's one way that I think we could consider regulating.
But I would go back to what Ted proposed. I mean, do we really even need to start the regulation process, given the, let's say, lack of market or limited market as such? So I'm just curious, Madam Chairman, if our neighboring towns, Milford, Westboro, Ashland, same kind of towns, sort of, do they have, beyond a short-term rental regulation, do they also have a Airbnb type regulation?
I'll have to look into that.
Okay.
There was one link to an article about an incident in Linfield, Mass. I don't know where that is.
I grew up
Do
there.
you know where that is? You grew up there?
Well,
That there was,
High school.
there was a big party at, at an Airbnb house, and there was a murder. I mean, not that murders can't happen at other times.
well, having spent an amount of time in Linfield, I would ask the same question as what's the attraction to renting an Airbnb in Linfield? Because there's
Exactly.
really nothing there.
Yep, but it was
Proximity
a
to
big
Boston.
house with a pool, and they just had a big party. I have no idea what the attraction is, but.
So I would guess you could find the same thing in Hopkinton if
Yes,
that's the
and
attraction
that's
in
the thing,
Linfield.
yeah, you could. But again, how would that be really any different from other rentals, or, when you go away for the weekend and your kids throw a party while you're away,
I personally, I think I would be reluctant to come up with any regulations without input, because I think the public forum thing would be a requisite to coming up with any sort of framework for how we want to do it, because I'm not sure that it's a current concern, and if it is a concern, I'm not sure what the concern is. To your point, I don't see really an issue with Airbnbs that you're not going to see with any other rental.
But at the same point, last week when somebody came and represented and asked for what are the regulations for Airbnb, it raised like red flag in my head. Maybe we should have regulations for Airbnb. Why are they checking that? That came up too. So I don't know either way. So
Yeah, it's been raised, every so often.
I certainly didn't mean to shut down discussion. I think it's worth looking into, and I think it's good to kind of wrestle with it before it could become a problem. But I'm trying to think, what worries do I have? I don't have any, but what worries do I have? I have a worry that I own a house with 5 bedrooms, and I'm gonna make that 5 different rentals. That would worry me if I was the neighbor, right? So that has me a bit concerned. I worry about an Airbnb slumlord. Just buying up properties and letting them fall apart, but then I think, who's gonna rent that Airbnb? Pretty quickly, it's gonna come out that that's a slummy place to stay, so that really doesn't scare me that much. I like the idea of, if it's a weekend rental, that the owner lives there most of the time, that it's not a property bought just for making money, but I also don't think they're gonna make a lot of money year-round on it anyway. And that's probably a pretty bad investment if that's what you're trying to do. So those are the things that pop into my head for worries. And then I think, I don't see them. By the way, I did look it up. For this weekend, I didn't look up VRBO, which I think is remarketing as Verbo. They were once VRBO. Now I think they're Verbo. That's what this sounds like on the commercials. Anyway, I didn't look them up. Airbnb has exactly 0 offerings in Hopkinton this weekend and exactly 0 marathon weekend. The last time we did this, I looked it up, and I think there were 2 or 3.
Yeah, I think I remember that, somebody looking it up at one point.
Or somewhere, A, B, Key Street, somewhere over there.
So,
But I see none on the map right now.
Right. One other thing, in my experience, when I've looked for an Airbnb in a suburb, the entire apartment has been made available to us, not one room and a bathroom.
Right.
Going by that same logic, I'm envisioning that anyone doing it here is essentially, it's not owner occupied at that point. It is available for rental. So that hopefully addresses any parking issues or neighbors complaining. Now, the neighbor needs to be notified in that case that, don't worry about it if you see a car in my driveway because I'm renting it out for the weekend or something along those lines. But I'm not completely certain it would be a problem where the owner and the renter are staying at the same time, you've got multiple cars. Just saying that in a suburb like Hopkinton, that would be more of a reality than the owner letting out a couple of rooms.
But just in that public comment period last meeting,
Yeah.
there's a realtor coming here from Holliston saying, I have clients that want to know what the regulations are here.
Yep.
So, you know,
Interesting.
and
And right now, it is not specifically a permitted use in any of our zoning districts. But that doesn't mean that expressly prohibits it, or it could be interpreted. It actually could be interpreted either way, but I
I
think
thought it was
it's,
if it didn't say no, it was okay.
so, yeah, and that's that, but then the Brook, it's the other way
Is it
around,
the other way?
If it doesn't allow it, then it's usually expressly prohibited.
yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
But clearly, people are doing it. And they probably think it's fine. And yes, there haven't been any problems thus far that we know of.
It might be worth as a first step looking at communities around here. To see
I
what
think,
they're
yeah.
doing, to see what kind of.
I think
rules
that
and
makes a
regs
lot
they
of
have.
sense. But I definitely encourage you, when I resend out the work plan, in the far right column of the work plan of that item, there's a number of different links. And just read what's there, and then it might link you to something else that would tell you more about a different community or things like that, okay?
We should have asked that woman last week or 2 weeks ago whether Holliston had regulations.
That's a good point.
So maybe that would
But
be a
we can
good
find out
community to
some
start with.
things, yeah, definitely.
So, sorry, just a thought. Would a home buyer worry about if the neighborhood has short-term rentals available? Would it matter to a home buyer? I don't think so.
It
right?
could, because it could, I mean, you never know. 'Cause I imagine that it could affect insurance rates. It could, you know, if something becomes prevalent in that, you know, in a particular area, maybe, you know, Lake Shore, for instance. I'm not trying to alarm Lake Shore residents or anything. But yeah, I mean, theoretically, it could.
Yeah.
It could start to affect property values and insurance rates and things like that. But not if it's 1 out of 1,000. So, right? So, yeah. Thank you. Okay, but I agree. Public forum, definitely. But I am not putting this on the back burner by any means. I think it's an important one that we should address. I mean, because otherwise it's open question, and then people will do whatever they want to, pretty much. But I don't think that, you know, we necessarily want to prohibit it. We just want to have it a little more controlled. Okay. Our next topic is residential sprinklers. So the thought has been that we could include something in the subdivision regulations, or recommend it to planning board, that they amend the regulations to include something like that. And I mentioned it at the last planning board meeting that wasn't coming up as a zoning bylaw, but we were going to address it and discuss the subdivision regs, and they were very open to that possibility. So they're encouraging of that. I cannot find there we go. So on page 32, of the PDF or 31 of the printed subdivision regs that John sent out. Fire prevention and protection measures, 8.6. So it goes through all of the things that are required for a proper water supply to fight fires for a subdivision.
That seemed to have much more to do with, is there enough water pressure and fire hydrants and those types of things in the subdivision? And if there aren't, then they have to create a cistern and those
Absolutely.
types of things. But I didn't see anything in there that talked about sprinkler systems for the home.
No, and that's, but
But
that's what we could add.
But it seems like the right place to do that.
Because, you know, and when you look at the outline, this is the fire prevention and protection measures would be appropriate, I think.
Right.
So my suggestion is that we would recommend some wording in here that just talks, and I don't know if it would be appropriate to add it all the way at the end, or, you know, how it would be organized. But that it would refer to particularly in the case of longer cul-de-sacs, longer driveways, or something like that, you know, it's just to
In the
say.
public safety arena.
Yeah, to consider in-home fire sprinklers for new subdivision buildings.
Could we make it a section on its own in that same location, but not as a
Yeah,
item?
like an 8.5 or an 8.7, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I quickly skimmed, I don't see anything in construction requirements that fit. That seem to be big deal stuff, like building roads and stuff, not what's going on in the building.
Yeah.
So it doesn't naturally fit there.
John, do you have any other thoughts on?
So I agree that it was 8.6 that probably seemed the most logical. And I think what we had discussed in the past is not making it necessarily a requirement, but making the requirement, so not making sprinklers a requirement, but making it a requirement to provide an analysis and reasoning as to why sprinklers are not being proposed. And I think that's, I don't know if we can word it in a certain way that makes sense in this section, but then also then refer back to the application and say on the application, why are sprinklers not being provided or proposed?
It's good. Analysis and rationale or reasoning.
And I don't know, it might be a little ambitious, but one thought that came to my head as I was thinking about this earlier is that if there's some kind of safety, you know how we have like an environmental analysis and a traffic analysis and a community impact analysis, if there's a safety analysis that you can kind of loop a bunch of things in, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. I can't think of another safety thing that you'd want to loop in, but I think that would be a good way to have fire sprinklers addressed. And
If there is in future, if there is a lighting thing, it can come into the safety one.
This is a good one to, I'll talk to Chief Slayman about, you know, that fire safety analysis, basically, you know, is there any specific analysis that they should be doing? You know, is there any, you know, so. Yeah.
I assume, were you looking for an answer? Sorry.
Go
don't
ahead,
interrupt.
go ahead, please.
I assume that all the other safety stuff is done by the building inspector. And I don't know how to build a house, but do you have beams that support the weight of the second floor, the third floor? Is the electrical wiring done all safely? I assume that's all building inspector stuff?
yes, that's not what I was referring to, and that's probably why I couldn't come up with something, but, you know, public health type things. If there could be an analysis for walkability, which could also go community impact analysis. I'm just kind of throwing anything against the wall to see what sticks at this point, but if you could do like a safety analysis and say the analysis must include review of these items, and then you can put residential sprinklers as A, walkability as B. I don't know. I can't think of anything else, but I'm sure we can think of something if we all combine our minds, maybe at a later date. But
given that you said it cannot be a requirement,
right,
would this be in the language of a recommendation or
So
a
you can't
guideline?
require sprinklers to
Sure.
be installed,
Sure.
but you can require them to analyze the potential of putting sprinklers in. So if you have this safety analysis, or we could even just leave it as a fire sprinkler analysis. It could be just its own standalone thing, and then have them justify why they're not doing sprinklers. And if it seems like it's a win-win for them to do it through this analysis, then they might end up doing it. I haven't looked into the regulations as to if relief is required for something, say a longer driveway or a longer cul-de-sac, you can then require it, since it's not straight away, done by the subdivision regulations. So I need to look into that a little bit further.
Sure.
I think I remember something like that. when she
We
I
was-
think-
brought it up.
Again, it's something that we negotiate with them now,
Right.
in situations that are specific, and it has a lot to do with, we don't want to, or we can't, get as many houses in if we have short driveways for all of them. So if we can, have really long driveways, we can get a few more houses in, but then we don't, we say, well, that really wouldn't work unless, and so we negotiate that right now. But I think John is saying, if we can take it one step further and say, okay, whenever you have this, exceeding this, or you are asking for a variance about length of driveway or whatever the case may be, then we require this. So I don't know if it can go that step.
So like shared driveways require a special permit. So you don't have to do a development with shared driveways. It's not, you can do the development with regular driveways, but if they ask for that relief, can you then say, yeah, you can do shared driveways, but you need to provide sprinklers to the houses that are on a shared driveway?
Why can't we require sprinklers if that's what we
It's a
wanted to
state,
do?
it's a
State
state
thing.
law. I need to find the actual language, but the chief is, and I forget what role she plays, but somebody at the state level said you can't require in your zoning to have sprinklers.
In the zone.
We can't require it.
So here's my bigger question. I'm all for sprinklers, by the way. I'm not
Yeah.
arguing against sprinklers. I'm trying to understand where it fits into what we're doing. The building inspector requires a certain level of safety with electrical wiring, right?
Right.
But that's not in the zone, and I don't know if
That's
it's
in the
under-
building code.
It's in the building code.
Right.
Why is a sprinkler not just a building code item? Why are we talking about it in a subdivision plan?
Because the
Is it
state,
because a fire in this house can spread quickly, whereas if the beam falls in this house, it doesn't affect the neighbors?
so for some reason, one reason or another, I don't know what it is, but the building code at the state level doesn't include sprinklers. And so a lot of the towns will just say, we follow the state building code. Or they're required to follow the state building code. They could possibly do more than that, but the state building code does not require sprinklers. So the town, I'd have to find out the actual language or requirement, but it's basically been said that towns cannot require as part of the building code to put in sprinklers.
So it's required in commercial buildings, correct?
Yes, not residential.
And from what I understood from the presentation that we went to, is part of the problem that it's not going into as many residential properties as it should, is because there's not a lot of contractors that install residential sprinkler systems.
Is this true for apartments as well, or does that have a different set of rules?
I think apartments need sprinklers, but I'm not positive
Yeah,
about that.
there's certain thresholds where residential
Density.
does require it, but it's not single-family development.
Yeah.
Subdivisions don't require it.
From a zoning perspective, could we incentivize them to include sprinklers? I think to your point about more homes in a particular subdivision, I don't know what that language
Right.
would look like, but could we find a way to incentivize builders?
That is a
Using zoning
possibility,
language.
but then you run into the, do we want to incentivize higher density?
I really like John's suggestion of tell me why you don't want to do it.
Yeah, and that's a good way to encourage people, because it at least makes them think about it,
Right, but-
And it opens up the conversation.
But the counter narrative, so I don't know if we are introducing language which says, if I've done some kind of quote unquote due diligence, and here is my report, and here are the reasons I'm not going to do it, what next? I mean, are we in a position to challenge that? And we don't have the resources to do that again and go back and do it again, kind of a thing.
Are
So
we not in a position, though, that if they say, I want to a longer driveway to say that maybe your reasons for not doing this are
Now you're talking
strong
incentive,
enough?
so yeah, you're right,
Yes.
so I'm
So
agreeing
that-
with you, yeah.
To me, that becomes a negotiation point. They
Right,
want
for
something.
whatever other variances the developer might be asking for.
Okay,
Then you can say, well, look, you're asking for this,
Yeah.
this, and this. It gets easier to cut you some slack here if,
But I like the thought of throwing it out there first to make them think about it,
Yes.
to tell me
Okay.
why they don't
Okay.
want to do it.
Okay.
Because from what I understood, it's not particularly expensive to do it at the point of construction,
that's true.
For new construction, yeah.
for new
I mean, not
construction.
percentage-wise, you know. And Rhea made a good point last time, you know, we wouldn't want to be in a position ever of requiring it for all new homes, because, you know, it could be prohibitively expensive if you're talking about building one home, and you're trying to build a smaller home, or, you know, that sort of things. Then percentage-wise, it could be a great deal. But a subdivision, they're spreading the costs, you know, over a number of different homes, and, you know, economies of scale and so on.
Just to throw another thing out there that just came to me is, it may make sense with the forms for a preliminary subdivision application or a definitive subdivision application to include, just with the form, some kind of flyer from the fire department saying why residential sprinklers are a good thing, so that they have that information to answer that question. And that flyer could address costs and address installation process and all that kind of stuff, to have those questions answered. So to kind of go to your concern, when they just say, well, I can't do it, maybe they'll have the information that they didn't have before, and they say, okay, I didn't do the fiscal analysis, but looking at this, it looks like maybe I can do it, and maybe that'll buy me some goodwill.
Okay. Do we have a limit to what that subdivision size ought to be for us to, in some sense, require the, okay.
So, and the subdivision regs apply to anything that's not an A and R, right? Okay, so it's, and the A and Rs are limited to, are they limited to by number of houses?
So
Or is
basically,
it just limited by those that are, you know, meet all the frontage requirements?
yeah, so it's basically those who meet the frontage can be an A&R. So you can do 10 A&R lots if you have a
Okay.
huge lot that
Yeah,
all
that
have frontage on a
perfectly
road, and
square,
they all
right.
have the lot size. So it's basically, the subdivision comes in whenever you're building a new road.
Okay. So does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. So the subdivision regs would apply to, you know, when it really gets down to it, fire sprinkler, the residential fire sprinklers also apply more now too, but, because of, our buildable area in town, is no longer, you know, right on roads that already exist. And that's also why fire sprinklers are becoming more and more, of interest, particularly to those who devote their lives to the safety, public safety, because longer cul-de-sacs, longer winding roads, longer driveways, narrow access, and therefore longer times from alarm to the point where they can get to you. And you know, there's the how many fire stations can you build in the town versus can you take care of it in a different way? And fire sprinklers.
I also feel this is a
yeah.
huge selling point, because
is.
if young families are planning to move into town, buying a brand new home, this definitely would be a selling point, that here it is, you've got safety built into the home. So
Yeah.
I don't know if the builder thinks that way, but once it's there, it's definitely something that's going to be on their bullet list of, here are the top features of this home. you know.
Now that I've seen the demonstration and I understand the differences and everything like that, it's something I will look for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It also brings down the home insurance,
Home insurance,
fees
Okay.
and the thing, so
Big
that
difference.
could be a good sell too. And it seems really positive. It's just about how we word it, right?
Exactly,
It's just,
exactly.
you don't want to say you cannot do it, you cannot not do
Not
it.
do it,
or
exactly.
so. But if we speaking about that, I was just looking in the same subdivision, in the driveway section, they have language that says applicant shall, where possible, provide for pedestrian or bicycle trails within the subdivision. So same way, if we just say applicants shall, where possible, make sure that sprinklers can be added, just as a suggestion, and then in addition to just putting the language in?
So the concern with that is shall in bylaws means it's required. So maybe you say should where possible, because that's how they differentiate. Shall is required, should is suggested.
Okay.
So if you put shall do it where appropriate or where able, that could be interpreted as, well, you're clearly able to put a sprinkler in here, why didn't you? It's required.
Okay.
And you can't require it.
And then in that case, I also, we mentioned, not just in the fire section, if about the long driveway or the negotiation of driveways, in the driveway section mentioned that if you want to negotiate the driveways, talk to the fire chief. If you have sprinklers, you can negotiate. So it's in multiple sections, so it keeps popping up somewhere, so.
Okay, so we are going to look at possible wording, analysis, rationale. We agreed that it makes sense to put it either as a separate section in the subdivision regs, but near the current fire protection item. And then I'm gonna look around for examples and talk to the chief about his thoughts on fire safety analysis, or defining a fire safety analysis that they need to do, or perhaps making it a broader public safety analysis. And what we can do also is, we can create two separate wordings, one that includes a specific, if they're asking for a special permit based on longer driveways, longer than normal cul-de-sac, et cetera, we can say that this is required. Well, John's gonna have to look into the legality of that, but we can offer up that wording as an alternative for the planning board to consider. So a more prescriptive one, and then the more suggestive, make sure you analyze this piece, okay?
John, do you know if there's any discussion at the State House about putting in sprinkler regulations for subdivisions? Or is there a lobbying group that's fighting that?
I don't know.
That
if
seems a
there's
little crazy to me at this point that
Yeah, I don't know why, and I can find out.
I'm just
I asked,
curious.
I
don't know if
asked
it
the
affects our
question,
work,
but I didn't get an answer that was really a solid answer. So I can definitely pursue that and try and find out why it's not in there.
I'm curious. I don't know if it helps us with our, but maybe it is. Maybe there's a good reason to not have something in there, I suppose. I can't come up with it, but.
Maybe they haven't come up to it yet. It's in the list.
They were talking at that presentation that they did about changing the certification level for people to install single-family or non-required residential sprinkler systems. And unless I'm misremembering, do you remember this? They were talking about changing the certification to install residential sprinkler systems as opposed to commercial, because it's not necessarily the same system in a high-rise building as it is in a home.
Oh,
And they were,
like making
did
it,
I make this up? Does anyone
I don't
remember this
remember
other
that,
than
but
me?
that doesn't mean you're making it up.
Well, my recollection is they were talking about changing the rules that you needed to get certified, that there weren't enough people to actually install residential sprinkler systems in all the new family homes. And I got the impression that was why it wasn't being pushed from a regulation standpoint.
From a
was that there
statewide
wasn't
perspective?
the manpower to do it, but that there was talk. And when you talk to the chief, you can find out whether I'm making all this up. But I understood that they were considering changing the certification process for installers,
okay.
which maybe is part of the reason why it's not statewide regulation. They just don't have the manpower to do it.
Would this apply only to subdivisions, Madam Chair, or could this also be expanded to individual homes, even as a recommendation? If it is a recommendation, could it be expanded to individual new homes?
Where would it reside if it were
Yeah, that
there?
would be, I mean, you could put something in the A&R section, but again, you can't really, the A&R process is a unique process where it's pretty straightforward and there's not a lot of debate. If they meet the requirements, they basically get endorsement. So there's usually no report that goes along with it. There's no, we usually even have to ask a narrative because some of these plans are not super clear when we get them as to what they're doing. So they're not even required to put a narrative explaining what they're doing. We ask them for that, and that's kind of a courtesy. So having them answer why they're not doing sprinklers is probably not going to happen. And also to add on to that, sometimes A&Rs aren't done necessarily for residential units.
Okay.
Would it be possible to put it in the application for building permit?
That then puts a responsibility on the building commissioner to review their analysis. And, I mean, what would be the teeth of that? Would they then not issue a building permit if their analysis wasn't good enough? I mean, if somebody...
I would, the only reason I suggest putting on the building permit is not because I expect the building department to say, no, you can't build. It's just, if you're gonna build, I think people don't look at sprinkler systems because they don't think about them. They just think of them as being expensive luxuries. So if there's, could be some process to hand out just information with the application for building permit and say at the bottom, you know, have you considered this? Or have you, you know, just to make it a thought process, not necessarily to make it anything more than just throwing it out there. Did you consider it?
So we could always include the flyer. So I think it would be beneficial for the fire department, working with me or anybody else, to create a flyer, just kind of the benefits of sprinklers, and hand that out, have a stack of them at the counter. I'm a little concerned with the building permit application because a lot of building permits aren't necessarily for new construction.
Okay.
They're for renovations, they're for electrical wiring, they're for plumbing. You don't see a lot of, aside from the one that's on Wood Street, you don't see a lot of single lot developments happening in town. They're usually subdivisions or they're remodels. And retrofit sprinklers are apparently more expensive and harder to do than new ones. The other point is that, just talking about, I had brought up with the fire department, why isn't there a push for retrofit in New England? Because there's so many old houses that aren't covered by this. And they said the big push right now is for new construction. They said if they can get all the new construction outfitted, then they're doing pretty well. So I think putting it with a building permit is going to not be counter to that effort, but maybe cause some confusion and some
I didn't
struggle.
consider the renovation section of it. And,
because I mean, and also if they're doing it for a subdivision, if they're doing it for the subdivision application itself, and then would they then have to do it for each building permit that they do?
oh, good point.
Because they'd have to get a building permit as well. So I'm just thinking for like Legacy Farms, not that Legacy Farms is going to happen again. Or I guess maybe Chamberlain Wayland is a better example. You're having 20 some odd houses. They're going to have to then do that for 20. I mean, it'd probably be the same thing for every application. It's not like they're doing it 20 sometimes, but it would be just that extra.
Yeah, I think it's a cost-benefit analysis at the
I
end
don't
of the
even
day.
think it's arduous because it could be a simple paragraph that they just copy and paste. It's just, I don't know if they're doing it for the subdivision and it's getting reviewed by the planning board, why would it need to get reviewed at the zoning enforcement officer level as well?
No, I have them in my head as, you know, subdivisions and single lot development.
If there was a lot of single lot developments
Then,
in
yeah.
town, then I think that would be beneficial, but I mean, I just don't see any.
But the fire risk of spreading to multiple homes is higher, I guess, in a subdivision like Legacy Farm, where the homes are closer as against single lot homes. So I can understand this being a cost-benefit calculus in that regard.
So
Or a risk-reward kind of a thing.
And just to clarify, the way it was explained to me by the fire department is that it's not necessarily to prevent the spread of fire to nearby homes, though that is a helpful benefit. It's more for personal safety. It gives you extra time to get out of the house.
Yes.
So the fires can go up pretty quickly. I mean, we saw that in the demonstration. And so this kind of puts that fire out, but doesn't completely eradicate the danger. It just gives everyone in the house time to get out. And then the added benefit is if you have extra time, it's going to slow the spread of the fire too. But
So
I
then
don't
we
think that's the primary.
Right. Then we should consider this for single lots too.
I
mean,
think it should be considered.
I think
for
we're all in
single lots.
violent
It's just at
agreement
this
on
point,
that.
it's a lot of
Yeah,
retrofit.
agreed.
And I think you brought up a great point of if they require it in the building code, do they have the manpower to actually install this, or is there going to be a backlog of development happening in a state that has already established that there needs to be more housing development?
Right.
You know, and then you're creating your own kind of dam of the river of housing,
It'll create an entire new industry. Look at the jobs.
right?
Maybe that's my next career.
Okay. So, I'm not going to go through the notes again, but I did jot down the other things that were discussed after that point, you know. So, John, I'm going to ask you to look into the legality, why it's not allowed to require it in the state, and I'll set up a discussion with Chief Slayman, and maybe we can go together and ask some of these questions of him as well. And then to continue to look into, you know, is there any way to incorporate this into the A&R process, or the, probably not a building permit, but any situation for new construction. Just new construction. Okay, good. All right. So on to the work plan, which you guys don't have a copy of in front of you, the latest version, but I'll very quickly tell you what we've sent on to the planning board. The car wash use, removing car wash use in downtown business district, which is going before the planning board shortly. The wireless communication bylaw, just the change to reflect the federal law changes. Solar farm overlay district, which planning board will still be working on the exact plots of land. And there's clearly a lot of public thought on both sides of this one. So we need to explain it well. And let's see,
The
reduce,
planning board vote was 7-2 on to continue that discussion, if I remember correctly.
yeah, I think,
Everything else was
7 to
unanimous.
2, yeah, I think so. Accessory family dwelling unit, those changes. The expansion, building permits for expansion to non-conforming, pre-existing non-conforming structures. So that went there. And the business survival plan for the downtown corridor project in terms of the signage that we sent last time. Did I miss anything? I think that was it.
I don't think you've missed anything, but what happened to food carts and traveling pet saloons?
Okay, so the mobile vendors, last year we sent a memo to the
Selectmen.
Board of Selectmen saying that we believe that was a general bylaw issue, not a zoning bylaw. John was still trying to get a discussion at Select Board about that and see whether or not they were going to kick it back to us. So it hasn't been discussed at the Select Board level.
Should we poke them again? Because personally, I see that as a bigger potential issue than B&Bs, Airbnbs.
Yep, I will find it on my list here. Mobile vendors, here we go, yep. Yep, JC has asked for agenda item at Select Board. Okay, I will highlight that so we can address that with him. Okay, so of the items that we did not cross off our list this time, the fire sprinklers, we'll continue to work on that. There was another article possibility for dealing with affordability, and that's the conversion of existing properties to apartment units, to 3 or 4 units. I think right now it's limited to 4. But that's another one. And I think that, doing this one at a time in subsequent years is a good strategy, so we don't overwhelm people. But that is one we can discuss in the coming months.
Madam Chair, could you repeat that? So your
Sure.
conversion of a standard home to a multi-unit home? Okay. So this is not a variation of our...
Accessory family
It's not,
dwelling
okay.
unit is a separate,
Sure.
so, and that is specifically a smaller unit attached to a home.
Of course.
Yeah. So, with the potential restrictions that we had on it. This one is conversions of residential property, which is 210-125. And that, right now, there are some restrictions, obviously, and we can look through the wording of it and see if we want to remove some restrictions. This is one of the ones that was suggested by Tom Terry that we should look at supporting, the affordability option.
Is this something we worked on last year as well?
It is something we worked on the year before.
It was the year before?
Year before.
One where we had 20 zoning.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Thought
So-
I remembered sitting here.
And we've talked about whether or not to address any of these, and we decided to focus on the accessory family dwelling unit first. So, it was just one of the several options we had to address. Okay?
Yeah.
So, but this is, Mr. Terry did bring it up this year, just last fall. So, okay. Let's see. So possible considerations were no owner-occupied requirement, fewer limits on the number of units per building. That's, some of the many things that were discussed, so, okay. Don't really see how this one is a zoning issue. This is downtown parking. It's just like the perennial issue of downtown parking. I honestly don't really see how we can address that through zoning. But please, let me know if you have other thoughts.
Well, I think that keeps going back to the fact that downtown parking requirements are not the same as they are in the rest of the town. I think that's...
But making them more onerous doesn't solve the downtown parking issue.
No.
So, so that's where, I've heard people suggest that, they should be the same as the other ones, because I'm like, but how can you just up the parking requirements when they can't provide more parking? What you're basically saying is that no business will ever be able to move in there, that sort of thing. So I don't see a solution that's a zoning solution.
Not for downtown.
Not for downtown, no.
Just a random thought. Some parking lots will have a compact car parking versus a standard car parking, which will be, smaller or narrower. Does that first, can we do that? And two, does that actually come under a zoning discussion at all? So can we expand the number of parkings by saying you're going to reserve 10 and for compact cars, which would have been 7 earlier, but you make them 10 because you're now changing the guidelines for compact car parking.
I don't know how enforceable that is.
Yeah.
Well, it is sort of self-enforced, right? Because you can only park a compact car there.
Well-
I watched a guy yesterday park on the hash marks that separated two different handicap parking spots. He decided the hash marks were a place he could park.
Okay.
So if someone's big old car overflowed that spot, I don't think, how many, you see it all the time anyway, people parking their cars right on the line,
That's true.
so they build themselves more space. I like your idea.
Yeah.
Being a compact car driver, I'd love more spots for me. I just don't know how enforceable it is.
It's just that compact cars are becoming more and more preferred, in my opinion. And I have to. I'm probably biased to that, but
The thing is, say you want to do that for downtown parking, most of the downtown parking is street parking. If I'm a business owner and I'm like, why do I have only compact parking in front of me? Why can't I have customers who have regular cars that want to park in front of my business? So that will come into play. It may be harder to implement on a downtown parking. It may be easier to do it on a lot or something like that. So it maybe the choices will be a little.
Right, but we don't have a problem for a lot.
Yeah,
at
for the
moment,
lots,
right? So-
that's true.
So in the parking section, they do have a provision for compact parking. Small compact car spaces can be 8 feet by 16 feet, as opposed to parallel curbside parking spaces, which are 8 feet by 22 feet, and all other spaces 9 feet by 18 feet. 9 by 18 is a standard parking space.
Okay. Save a foot.
But parallel parking to maneuver into the space has to be 22 feet. So I don't know if you'd be able to do compact parking on street. So, and there's also a limitation as to how many compact spaces you can have in a parking lot. So there is a provision for compact spaces and there's a limitation for compact spaces. And there's a reason parallel parking spaces on roads are a certain dimension. It's kind of an industry standard.
Okay.
So putting compact spaces on there might be a significant challenge.
Okay. And I assume it's, for the restrictions for it within a lot, it's a certain percentage can be compact, right?
Yeah, so it says in parking lots containing up to 50 spaces, 20% of such parking spaces may be for small car use. Parking lots of 50 spaces or more, up to 40% may be for small car use.
So that doesn't help downtown again, when we're talking about, sometimes a building will have 2 or 3 spaces behind it, but not.
When the new lots come in, it might be something for someone to talk about.
If we
There's nothing can
build
do with that right now.
if we build a municipal lot, that would be, or multi-tier garage. Soon, one of these days. Okay, so downtown parking. I really honestly would like to take it off here, even though people are gonna bring it back up again, I'm sure. But how would people feel about?
I'm okay with you taking it off.
About the same way.
Because I don't feel like it's a zoning
our issue.
issue.
And we can't touch it right now. If construction is going to happen and lots are going to be built and stuff, we can't, right now, we can't make it harder, so.
Yep. Okay, Airbnb, short-term rentals, already talked about. That will be high on our list. Trash pickup for condominiums, which is being introduced as a citizens petition this year.
Trash bag?
However,
that-
yeah. However, I still think it needs to be researched by us. I don't think it's gonna go anywhere at town meeting without the proper research. And it is going to take some light reading of all of the subdivision list of conditions and covenants and whatever they're called, of all the different subdivisions in town. So we can obviously start with the ones that are in this group who've petitioned.
Who's
But
in that group?
the Preserve, Davenport Village, Indian Brook, and Stagecoach. Those are the ones I wrote down.
So the only one I know right away is Davenport Village.
I know that one too.
Where are the other ones?
The
Stage,
Washington State Park is,
The Preserve is, that
Preserve.
one.
Stagecoach is
Condos.
off of Wood Street, Patriots Way, I believe. It's,
Indian Brook is in Elm Street, right next after Elmwood School.
After what?
After
Elmwood School.
Go down,
Oh, okay.
So have more people beyond the gentleman who came and made that representation?
It's just
He
under
got a
the-
group of
You head towards South.
Other
condo
Okay.
associations
Towards
to,
join, Okay.
join and petition together.
okay.
it's before the.
But the way I look at it, we need to review these agreements to see what the developer agreed with the town at the time that it was built. And it has to do with the size and maneuverability,
lots.
for the,
Trash
for
truck?
the trash, what do
Harvey?
you call them, dumpsters.
Okay, no, okay.
So, and if it was built such that, if they said, and they agreed with the town that, we will always do private pickup, and therefore, we are not building it to the specifications necessary for, then, I mean, that's the answer. But if they have the capability, and if they were built with the ability to have municipal trash pickup, then we can discuss it. But That's my understanding, you know, and we definitely need to get DPW in here. I mean,
Yeah, there's no
John?
requirement that DPW pick up trash for anybody.
yeah,
So the concern is if this passes and it becomes too expensive for the town, they could just stop trash collection, public trash collection,
For the entire town?
for the entire town. I mean, theoretically, yeah. Westboro doesn't do public trash collection.
Southborough doesn't either, I think.
How do they,
all
how do they get
private
rid? of the
You
trash?
have to take it to the
Oh,
dump
you-
or you have to pay extra money for the pickup sticker.
Oh,
The development on Elm Street, I think they just have dumpsters. They don't have individual trash cans there.
and they probably have a private company come and pick up their dumpsters, empty their dumpsters.
Yes, I would say so, but if, from a town's perspective, now we've got to send out, you know, trash trucks that pick up trash barrels
And,
and dumpster dumpers
right,
for that property, and
yeah,
there's potential, I mean, and if you say, okay, to
could be a
these
huge
guys, then,
expense.
yeah.
It could be a huge
Huge for the
expense.
town.
Yeah.
And that
So-
would probably include all of Legacy Farms too.
Hmm?
Probably include all of Legacy Farms too.
Yeah, and I don't know what the rules are for Legacy Farms right
Well,
now.
Legacy Farms part of it is a condominium development, so
Yeah.
that would be covered, if they rescinded that
Yeah.
section, they would be covered as
So,
allowed for public pickup.
My other question would be about private roads, like Davenport.
yeah,
It's listed as
It's a private road.
no
That's
trespassing.
part of the problem too, I think.
yeah, private
So-
roads and the, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, if school buses don't have insurance to go on private road, how can trash trucks go? So then they will get into another round of trouble. There seems too many complications about it, that or too many unknowns about doing this, but
Well, that would be my question, whether or not it's even liability-wise
I know.
a good idea for the town to be on private roads. They have private plows down there too, don't they? Like all those places have their own
Sanctuary
plowers.
Lane has all private. Trash
Yeah.
pickup, snow removal, everything's private.
Out of curiosity, does the moderator recuse himself at town meeting when his bill comes up?
Guess he would have to.
Yes.
They have to.
Yeah?
I don't know if he would, but I think he's supposed to.
That would make good sense.
I've seen other things that would make good sense at town meeting, and they don't seem to happen, so.
I just have a question about whether or not the cost has to be estimated for them to put that forward. Does the analysis have to be done in terms of cost? So, for approval at town
If the
meeting?
cost of accepting a road before it's constructed doesn't have to be considered, I doubt this does.
I thought
Somebody
we,
might ask.
I thought we did have to, for the cost
So
to be
it
considered.
is, not to get off topic, the cost to construct the road has been determined from 2016.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't been updated, and there's no requirement it gets updated in order for the road to get accepted.
Mhm.
It's just kind of the subdivision approval process. But, I mean, I don't know in terms of budget impacts if any of these things are required to provide fiscal analysis to be
Okay,
accepted.
no. Okay,
I think somebody probably will ask that question.
yeah. Okay, let's see, next items. These we had previously designated as medium on our work plan. We got through the high-level items. Subdivision lighting, street lights or wayfinding lights, basically giving some guidelines in subdivision regs for the lighting to be provided. The streamlining the permitting process, we discussed this quite a lot, and a lot of the stuff is I mean, I think it has been, there have been improvements in various ways in terms of, you know, strongly encouraging some pre-planning with professional staff before things come to planning board or other boards. I think all of those things are gonna improve the process. I don't know if, there's much more we can do. I mean, I have reviewed a lot of those regs, and a lot of them have been reviewed here. But that's my opinion. Thoughts? I don't know that there's a lot we can make an impact on. Okay. Low priority. This was previously designated by us as low priority. These car wash add to industrial A by right. And really the question was, is there demand for it? Does it make sense to add it? Is it a special permit one right now? And we were talking about adding it to, as a by right?
No, it's not.
It's not allowed at all.
That came up at the last town meeting. That was the trade-off at the last town meeting.
Right. Okay. So that's one. Parking requirements, and this is review and revise based on certain uses, warehouses, manufacturing. Again, I don't know that there's a lot of demand for it right now, but it is something we can consider discussing.
The demand is kind of like a reverse demand, meaning there's so much open office space along 495 that adjusting the parking requirements might make our existing vacant office spaces more attractive relatively. And the uses have changed pretty dramatically over the last 20 years, so there might be some room for us to try to be more competitive. So are people knocking down our doors saying, you've got to change this? If you talk to the commercial real estate people, they say this would be something that's attractive.
Okay.
And it's a change towards what, allowing more cars?
Having less parking requirements.
Because
in
warehouses don't employ as many people, so if they're using it for warehouse or manufacturing, that sort of thing, you don't need as much parking. So use-based.
When you go to a Dell, their corporate headquarters, I mean, every parking space is filled there. But you go down, 2 buildings down, and it's half empty.
Right, yeah.
So it's certain uses require less.
So is the development idea then, there's already a parking lot there. Would it be, we want to put another building where the parking lot is? We want to turn it into grass? Like, what would they do if the parking restrictions were eased? So you didn't need as many spots, what's the next step?
A lot of it has to do with people wanting to redevelop.
Okay.
And so
knock down the building. and start again.
let's just start over. And if we can build this new facility where we can put more building there and less space, there's a return on investment of that capital improvement. A lot of this stuff is very speculative because we're guessing because the town doesn't have the capital to develop these properties. We're depending on entrepreneurs out there to come and try to do something.
But I certainly have noticed things like that, huge parking lots around a building, and a building used to be a restaurant or club or something like that, and now is a retail store. And, it's like huge parking lot that, they usually have 3 or 4 cars there at a time. So, it definitely happens.
The reason we brought this, we think that we should look at it.
Yeah.
What the recommendation is, don't know.
Okay, and this next one was from John, and that's to teach us about the concept of form-based zoning. Form rather than use. So, I think this is it has to start as a lesson and go from there, and that we can start to educate ourselves, and we can start to think about what that means and how that would take shape here and whether or not there would be benefit.
Great.
And not understanding much of anything about it, that's all I can say about it. So I think that we should just set aside, one half of a meeting for you to present that to us and teach us about it, okay? So, you tell me when you might be ready, okay?
It's looking like the summer.
Okay. So, in site plan review, so this would be a regulation rather than a zoning bylaw potentially. Dark sky or lighting standards and regulations. This is kind of a long-term item that comes up every once in a while. We looked at it, Ted, we looked at it like 3 years ago, and I think prior to that probably too, but we looked at it 3 years ago. It could be a huge thing and with a lot of detail in it. Or we can simply say something vague like, like is in our current regs. Not, we keep parking lot lights, safety lights, we keep them down to a certain level, so that it doesn't light up the sky for everybody around the area.
Madam Chair, is this to address light pollution? Or
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
it, okay.
But there's feelings on both sides of it. We can go too far and have everything really dark all the time. So, like on many of our scenic roads, I mean, it gets dangerous at night, I think.
5 miles an hour after 9 o'clock.
Exactly. But
I
there's
thought we had another proposal to increase
the lights. I know.
Exactly, so,
Wayfinding lights, that was wayfinding. So
Okay.
not do street lights, not do big, high street lights.
Okay.
But just, the really small wayfinding lights in a subdivision, so it's not,
almost like the solar lamps.
yeah, almost like
Okay.
those, yeah. So
I get it.
it's to give guidelines, and I really think that there might need to be a public forum on this one too, just to get people's thoughts on it before we start thinking about writing any. I don't know how people feel in general. But I also don't think it's the most pressing issue
Right.
on the agenda. So, okay. Let's see. These items still considered low priority. This was about consolidating similar zoning bylaws and simplifying or clarifying. Again, it might be a pipe dream to do it because a change like that would still have to go through town meeting. And just, it might not be worth the work. So it's just my organizational self thinking, oh, no, we should reorganize it this way. It's like, but I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. Protect large tracts of private open space. This is also being discussed as part of the Growth Study Committee. It certainly has come up. I don't know that specific recommendations are coming out of there yet related to this, but I did, we've talked about this, town right of first refusal, what parcels that applies to in town, and just clarifying all of that. If there's any way to have discussions with property owners to at least to indicate the town has interest in any large open space that still exists in town, that sort of thing. And John, if there's anyone working on this within the professional staff, just let us know. So, because it's not necessarily a zoning issue, it's just something that I think we all care about, so. Okay, stone walls. This was a low priority thing from the planning board, just to provide more guidelines for rebuilding historic stone walls when people find them in disarray along a scenic road in front of their house. And so, because we've had situations where We thought everybody understood what they were going to do, and then they rebuilt them looking very different than the historic stone walls normally look. So it was kind of a wake-up call that just because we thought we knew what they were talking about, it didn't
When you say
happen that
we, you
way.
mean you on the planning?
Planning board.
I'm curious where that was.
Can't remember the road. It was, do you remember, Carol?
Is it Box Mill Road?
Uh,
Because it's one that I talked to a planning board member
Saddle
about.
Hill or Pond Street?
Pond Street? It might have been Pond Street. I can't remember.
Wasn't it Wilson Street, off of Wilson?
No.
No? Okay.
No, it was in front of some fairly large, I don't know if it was a subdivision or something like that, where they were going to build a stone gate, and then it was going to connect to the historic stone wall next to it. And instead, it kind of, they used the stones from the stone wall, and they very carefully preserved all the stones, but then they built it into a very
I want to say it's on
flat
Pond Street.
top. Yeah, I think so.
Something similar happened on Box Mill, that little road right off of
Yeah. And it's like, well,
the old stone wall.
thank you for the effort, but no, that wasn't quite what we had in mind.
Stone wall.
Well, the one on Pond Street is very square.
Yeah, very square, very, very square.
All the walls going up to it are, just
This
kind
is
of
the
rough.
same way,
Yeah.
it's a retaining wall holding back a bunch of loam and stuff, and
Yeah.
it's not at all what was there before.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was just curious.
Yeah, it was, but clearly it's
If
happened
that's
more than
why.
once. So that, even though, again, it would not be in a zoning bylaw, it's something that, really needs to be written and to help guide people a little bit better. Okay. The retail store square footage, we were going to increase, and that, I think we put it aside, one, because of demand, whether or not it really needed to be done right then and there, and also because we wanted to investigate, the right size to increase it to and what makes sense, and also, is this one of those uses that we would want to encourage in industrial A and B, so let's, I think it should stay on our work plan. I think it is something that we need to talk about, but I just do think we need to do some more research on that as well. Mobile vendors then is on here. And then these are very much, not a proposal for specific bylaw changes, but things that people have brought up to us. And I think that we need to discuss how to address these, if at all. Consider long-term development opportunities on South Street, and that's like the incentives for developers to come in, since, as you pointed out just a few minutes ago, it's not a town putting capital into it. And and these are, like the ways to encourage biotechnology uses. Is there anything we can do in zoning? We had already talked about the MRTA buses, and that's a possibility. Is Brian Hurst still on select board? He's for a few more years? Yeah, so he has been the liaison. So this is something that we can continue to look into.
On that topic, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Amazon employees are getting a bus from Westboro Station to bring them to that new office on,
Oh, I saw that, yeah.
Otis Street.
yeah,
Ah,
yep. It's I think a 2-mile hike, if I'm not, maybe 3 miles, or maybe less.
Is it that long? I don't think it's that far.
It's not even that far, right?
I would say maybe a mile and a half.
A mile and a half, okay. But regardless,
still.
Not an easy walk in the morning.
not an easy walk,
You're
exactly.
trying to make it for train.
No, definitely not.
So we definitely should be looking
Yeah.
at something similar
Yes.
if we want to attract that kind of
Yeah.
investment.
But clearly, it's something that Amazon saw the need for. I mean, are they paying for it themselves?
I don't know that.
So,
I believe it's a private shuttle.
yeah, it's private. So,
Oh, okay.
So the question is,
Why would that make news in that case if it was a private shuttle, I wonder?
I don't know.
I assumed it was a town-provided,
As far as I know, it's not, but I can look into it.
okay, no, just curious.
So, but I still think that has merit, it's like, if we look at the transportation
Yes.
issues, for people. And Ria's often brought up the fact that, young professionals, not necessarily as car-focused as, us older folks.
That's true.
So,
They'll be unable to come to as much as interviews, forget the job.
yes,
Yes.
I had that problem when I first came to Boston, not being able to get to an interview. And, the last one is just, again, my organizational thing, creating a table for zoning allowed. So I was going to work with John on that. Didn't get very far this last year on that.
Was that what we worked on last year, the whole grid with?
No, actually, that's something different. That was, but I was talking about within the zoning bylaw, why don't we just take the existing bylaws and create a table that shows what's in each one? And I think these things exist in various forms already, but I'm thinking of, really trying to introduce this so we can add it to the bylaws themselves, so it's just an easy, quick view of what applies to certain situations.
I've got this on my to-do list, so.
Okay, so,
We work on
well, I've got it on my to-do list too. So.
The table we worked on last year, is that just
That's-
too unwieldy, or are we deciding that
Well,
is-
that's really for a different purpose.
Right,
Yeah, but
but it was an interesting discussion.
I think it was as well. Yeah, and in fact, I wanted to make sure that Sundar got to see that at some point and see what we did, because, I think it informed some decisions that, some focus at least of what we've done last year. So it was essentially talking about the uses in various, and the value that each, oh my goodness, the value that, that different categories of business might bring to the town.
Okay.
And, it was subjective, but, yeah, it was something.
Right.
It was something.
It was something that we all put our collective heads
Yeah,
into.
no, I still think it's valuable. That's why
is,
it's
yeah.
like, it gives you a perspective sometimes to see, okay, does it make sense?
It's almost a scoring chart for, should we be considering a particular business or a particular
It's like
property.
strategic planning. That's,
Right,
I based it on that, strategic planning for business, yeah. So, okay, so that is what's on the work plan. And I'm not gonna make you guys think about anything else tonight, but when we come back on March 3rd,
March 3rd.
I would like to add any items that you think are burning issues that should be addressed. And then we'll prioritize this work, but I'll pick 1 or 2 items that we can start to discuss, so it's not just an organizational meeting on March 3rd. We'll actually,
March 3rd, is it Tuesday?
March 2nd.
no,
is-
March 2nd, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's March 2nd. And March 9th is a planning board meeting at which the public forum for the zoning articles will be held, okay? So that'll be here on March 9th, right?
March.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, in the library. We meet in the library now.
So March 9th is the public forum for
Public
the planning
forum for
board,
planning board,
okay, got it.
but dealing with this year's town meeting articles.
The planning board starts at 7:30.
Planning board starts at 7:30.
Usually it's 7:30, but
That might start earlier.
they may decide to start earlier or
I'll
keep
put
it
it at
7:30.
7.
Okay. And I imagine they'll do zoning articles first on the agenda, but that's not decided yet. But I have a feeling that that's probably how she'll organize the meeting. Honorable Madam
I
Chairperson.
don't think there's that many items on that agenda, so probably.
Okay, good.
Do you anticipate the solar overlay will be discussed between now and then with possible additional properties added to it? Or is that going to just wait for that open?
It's
that
going to wait
forum
for the
discussion?
public forum, yeah.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to, I don't think it's going to
We could add it to the
discuss.
February 10th meeting, but that's just gonna be an internal discussion with the planning board. It wouldn't be publicly,
Yeah.
I guess it would be publicly advertised, but it wouldn't
Right,
be
right, right,
a
right.
public hearing.
Yeah, I don't know that it will be.
When I get the agenda, I'll take a look.
Okay, sounds good.
Just so you know, we are compiling the abutters list for the solar overlay, and we have 850 abutters that we are notifying.
Already, without
And
adding
that's-
any additional
And
process.
that's actually not even including the Milford
End of
request
March
for
is when
overlay.
we're proposing to have our meeting. Exactly.
Okay.
So you're talking about.
What's interesting
It's for the,
is-
it's for the article, or is it for the new solar farm? That's not.
The map, basically.
Okay, it's for the map.
What's
the whole map.
interesting is, we're all abutters to potential solar right now.
That's what
And
I
that-
think so
It
too.
may alarm them, but the truth is,
I
I mean,
agree.
I agree we have to let them know, but just thinking out loud about abutters, we're all abutters right now.
Okay, so review of minutes from last time. Just a little typo on the second paragraph about Linda Moore. Just says he, H-S-H-E. He, she said.
Oh.
You see it?
Boy,
Picky.
I didn't,
read carefully.
I didn't see anything else.
I missed that.
You missed it.
I did.
I thought, at first they might be politically correct about it, but I'm like, wait, no, we knew she was a female. So I think it was safe to say she.
Are we adopting gender neutral?
Yeah, exactly.
They? Are they saying they for everything now?
I can't stand it. I'm sorry.
My son is into it and he's insisting that I use that.
Oh, I know, it's
Yeah.
so hard. I can't do it. Okay, entertain a motion to approve? Second. Nope, somebody has to move it.
So moved.
Thank you. Okay. Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed,
I'll
abstentions?
abstain, I wasn't here.
Okay. And what else do I have? Nope, nothing else. Good. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions?
I will not
Good
abstain
night.
from
Then we-
that. I am here.
Yes, you are here. Here. Okay, I'll get the work plan out to you guys before our March meeting.